My father told me to step aside when he favored his favorite son. He said, "Walk away if you don't like it." I did. He regretted it within weeks. Have you ever had a situation when your intuition tells you something is wrong, but everyone else thinks you're crazy? That was me 3 months ago, sitting across from my father in his massive mahogany office, listening to him discuss family legacy while gently sliding in the most devastating betrayal I'd ever encountered. My name is Jack. I'm 32. For the past 9 years, I've worked with my father at our family business, a mid-size logistics firm he started from the bottom up. It wasn't a flashy empire, but it was stable, consistent clientele, strong contracts, and a dedicated team that had been there since before I understood what shipping manifests were. Dad took pleasure in his firm, and I was happy to be his right-hand man. I started from the bottom, physically lugging boxes, doing graveyard rounds in dilapidated trucks, and answering phones at 2 a.m. when drivers missed checkpoints. Slowly, I gained greater responsibilities. Initially, I managed accounting. Then comes logistical planning. Then came management. For the past 3 years, I've essentially ruled the place: payroll, customer connections, fleet upgrades, you name it. Dad became increasingly absent. Even then, he let me do the talking. During meetings, he'd nod and smile, as if he were seeing the realization of his legacy. I assumed I was the next in line. I assumed he considered me as his collaborator, perhaps even his successor. It turns out I was only keeping the seat warm. The first red flag appeared on a Monday morning, folded neatly with an innocuous request. Dad instructed me to come in early before the squad arrived. Nothing out of the usual. We did that sometimes, particularly during high season. But this time, his tone was different, less collaborative and more rehearsed, as if he had prepared what he was about to say. I strolled into his office, coffee in hand, and he was already sitting, back straight, fingers intertwined on the desk. Across from him sat my younger brother Brandon, who had recently graduated at the age of 26 and had previously been more interested in Bitcoin and influencer marketing than logistics. "Jack," Dad remarked, motioning for me to sit. "We've been thinking about the future." I looked at Brandon, who gave me that crooked grin he usually had when he was faking his way through anything, the same grin he had when he forgot my birthday last year and claimed he had planned the SMS incorrectly. I nodded slowly and took my seat. "I want you to begin training Brandon," Dad continued. "Show him the ropes, including the accounts, systems, and customer connections. Eventually, I'd prefer him to take over operations while you focus on strategy." I recall blinking, not sure whether I heard that correctly. "Wait, take over operations? Like my role?" I asked. Dad leaned back. "Yes. You will ultimately manage the big picture, less hands-on. It is a natural transition." Brandon, still smirking, joined in. "Don't worry, brother. I will not screw it up. Only a little refresher is required. I should have said something right away. Should have laid everything out. But I did not." I nodded. I grinned. I played the good son. Then I left that office with my stomach in knots. I spent the following few days trying to make sense of it. Perhaps I misunderstood. Maybe Dad didn't intend it the way it sounded, but the more I tried to justify it, the clearer it became. This was not a joint plan. It was a demotion. Brandon was given my function without asking, and I was forced into some nebulous strategy position, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, Brandon walked about the office like he owned it, asking interns where we kept the energy drinks and flaunting his new wristwatch as if it were essential to freight management. I was expecting for Dad to explain, to sit me down and say, "Hey Jack, you're still the anchor here, this is just temporary." But the conversation never occurred. Instead, Brandon received a new office. They repainted mine without asking me. I discovered out when I stepped in and almost tripped over a stack of Amazon boxes including gaming seats and LED lights. My nameplate vanished just like that. I wish I could say that's when I snapped. That I stepped into the boardroom and flipped a table. But I swallowed it. I kept everything operating. I arrived early, remained late, and answered questions Brandon had no idea he should be asking. I did the work because I adore the firm. Perhaps I didn't know who I was without it. The second blow was personal. Brandon lasted precisely 8 days before making his first huge mistake. He unintentionally terminated a long-standing contract with one of our oldest clients, Shannon Freight Lines, a family-run trucking firm that had been with us since high school. They weren't the largest customers, but they were devoted. Shannon stood firm every winter when other firms canceled their contracts due to inclement weather. They trusted me. We had handshake arrangements based on mutual respect. Brandon had lost their faith after optimizing their route using a third-party AI scheduler he discovered on a pricey SaaS marketplace, sending their trucks into a storm zone. 2 trucks fell off the road. 1 driver was hospitalized with a fractured leg. Shannon called me outright angry. When I tried to smooth things over, I noticed Brandon had already sent them an email with a GIF. A crazy GIF of a guy shrugging, and I apologize for the words, "We live, and learn." I felt humiliated. I immediately contacted Dad. "Dad, this is horrible." I shouted this while pacing around the lot behind the building. "We could lose Shannon. They work as emergency room drivers." Brandon reacted with a GIF. "Dad, this is a GIF." There was a pause at the other end. Then Dad stated he was learning. "Give him some slack." I laughed. I actually laughed. "You would have had my head if I had done it at the age of 26. "You're not 26, he continued, his voice becoming chilly. "You are 32. You should be able to deal with your brother's inexperience." That was the first time I'd heard it that clearly. This was not about giving Brandon an opportunity. It was about making me carry him. The next week, I saw subtle but purposeful modifications. Reports that I used to evaluate were now submitted to Brandon. Clients I had managed for years were transferred to him. My email access was limited. It was a problem, they claimed, and I was conveniently left out of a teleconference with our investors. I had no idea about it until I viewed Brandon's schedule and spotted the meeting title. Quarterly Update with Lead Operator, Lead Operator. That was my title. At lunch one day I approached Dad. We were at a tiny Greek restaurant near the workplace. It was our regular hangout. We had been sharing souvlaki and inside jokes there for years. This time, he was all business. I set down my fork and said, "I need to ask you something. Am I being phased out?" He did not blink. Didn't even seem startled. Not phased out. Just repositioned. That is corporate talk. You mean phased out. Jack, don't be theatrical. You are still part of the vision. Brandon simply provides a new viewpoint. He's young, knows technology, and investors appreciate that. However, he is unfamiliar with the company. He does not respect it. He's playing office like it's a TikTok craze. Dad exhaled and sat back in his chair. You've had your time. Perhaps it's time to stand aside and allow someone else take a shot, the word had. I'd had my fill. Like I was a relic being carted off to the museum, while Brandon pranced around with his neon piano and motivational phrases tacked to his door. I left lunch early. That night, I stayed late at the workplace alone. With the lights turned out and only the buzz of the vending machine, I wandered the floor like a ghost, touching the workstations, the white bars, and the conference room seats, which were still warm from the day's disputes and coffee-fueled brainstorming I'd helped construct it all. My fingerprints were everywhere. Now I felt like a stranger in my own home. The breaking point occurred 3 days later. When I got into the office, I noticed my true staff, the folks I'd hired and trained, huddled around Brandon in the break room. He was giving out cupcakes. He grinned as he introduced the promotion cupcakes. Dad made it official. I am now the chief of operations. I blinked. When they spotted me, the room felt silent. Someone even moved aside, as if I had strolled into the wrong gathering. I was staring at Brandon. What? Oh yes. He grinned as if it were nothing Dad intended to tell you. It was a last-minute decision, but I am now officially in charge of operations. Pretty nice, huh? I did not move. Didn't say anything. I turned and walked right into my father's office. He looked up from his laptop, unsurprised to see me. You made him chief of operations? I inquired, my voice calm but quiet. You couldn't even look me in the eye while saying it. It would happen eventually, he said, closing the lid on his laptop. It's better to tear the Band-Aid, I shook my head. You don't tear a Band-Aid off someone who is bleeding out. You fix them up first. This is a business choice. No, it is a family decision masquerading as a business decision, and you didn't even bother with the disguise. He stood and walked around his desk. Jack, if this is about titles or ego, then it is about respect. I pointed to the door. He never worked the night shift, never lost sleep because of a delayed shipment. He had no idea what net 30 phrases meant until this week. Dad's expression tightened. You're not allowed to dispute my judgments. This is my firm. You work here because I allow you. There it was. Devoid of niceties. 9 years of work, commitment, and sacrifice are reduced to permission and a favor. Then let me make things easy. I added. My heart was pounding, but I did not hesitate. I resigned. He raised an eyebrow. Are you serious? You said I had my time. Fine. Enjoy the future. And I left. No dramatic exit. No smashing doors. Just silent. As I went out, bitter air swallowed me. I did not sleep that night. My phone buzzed incessantly. Friends were concerned, as were co-workers. Brandon sent me a meme of a person waving farewell with the phrase, "Don't let the door hit you." I did not answer. I looked at the ceiling till morning, wondering what I'd just done and who I was today. But the problem with being underestimated, or put aside, as in yesterday's news, is that people will ultimately stop watching you. They figure you're out of the game, so you make your move. Because the firm didn't operate only on spreadsheets and meetings. It relied on people, and I understood precisely where the fault points were. The day after I stopped, everything seemed motionless. There were no meetings, calendar notifications, or Brandon playing lo-fi rhythms through the speakers at my old workplace. I sat at my kitchen table, wearing a hoodie, gazing at a cold cup of coffee and an untouched breakfast sandwich that I couldn't remember cooking. The stillness was terrible. I had spent the last 9 years waking up to fire drills and client calls. Now I was at home, unemployed, 33 next month, with no backup plan and no idea what to do next. I'd want to tell you that I leaped out of bed, inspired and determined to conquer the world. But that's a lie. To be honest, I spiraled a little. The first week was a whirlwind of Netflix, takeaway, and ignoring calls from individuals I wasn't ready to speak with. My flat, which had previously served as a pit break between 12-hour workdays, began to seem like a jail. I felt restless, furious, and lost. I kept repeating my last talk with my dad. You work here because I allow you. As if all I had done was meaningless, as if I were a glorified intern, whose existence he just tolerated. The toughest aspect was not even the betrayal. It was an identity crisis. For several years, I was the company. People respected me and trusted me to make judgments. Now I was simply a man in sweats, watching repeats of a cookery show I didn't particularly enjoy. The worst thing was that Brandon was probably sitting at my desk with his feet up, behaving as if he'd earned it. But, painfully, slowly, something within me began to alter. Tyler, our head of fleet maintenance, sent the first text. Only 5 words. You did not deserve that, dude. That one message broke something open. Others arrived gradually over the next few days. Sophia from accounting, Olivia from customer service, and even 2 of our younger dispatchers all mentioned similar things. The firm immediately felt different. That things were becoming sloppy. That Brandon had begun outsourcing simple chores that he did not grasp. The morale was dismal. I wasn't sure what to do with the knowledge at first. I was not going to beg to get my job back. But something more was brewing. Something softer than outrage. Something more targeted. If they didn't want me at the table, I would make my own. The thought struck me about 2 a.m. On a Tuesday. I was laying awake, surfing through employment boards, when I came across an advertisement for a freight brokerage training program. I didn't need the program. I could teach it. But it sparked an idea. What if I did not attempt to join another company? What if I start one? The more I reflected about it, the more it made sense. I had a thorough understanding of the logistics sector. I knew where the inefficiencies were. I knew which customers were overcharged and which drivers were underpaid. I recognized who was being overlooked, who wished for better treatment, and who would follow me if I had something to give. I didn't need a building or a warehouse. Not yet. I only needed a laptop, a phone, and a plan. That night I started a blank document and labeled it Phase 1. I began reaching out gently. I was not attempting to poach anyone. Not yet. I simply wanted to know what people needed. I phoned Shannon Freight Lines first. They still hadn't renewed their contract with my father's firm following the disaster. Claire Sullivan, the owner, sounded exhausted when she picked up. Jack, is that you? She asked. It's me, I replied. Just checking in. I've heard about the driver. Is he okay? She exhaled. Broken femur. He's recuperating, but it'll be a long process. I paused. If you are still deciding on logistics partners, I am working on something. Nothing formal yet. But if I made something better, smaller, and more attentive, would you be interested? There was a prolonged pause. Then you construct it, Jack, and I will be your first client. That was all I needed. I utilized my limited resources and a tiny personal loan from my undergraduate roommate, Adam, to form my own LLC. I named it Forge Logistics. It felt symbolic. I was not inheriting anything. I was creating something new from start. The following several weeks were terrible. I worked on a folding table in my little living room. There is no secretary, administrator, or expensive CRM software. Only spreadsheets, phone calls, and pure willpower. I formed agreements with independent drivers I met over the years. I used open source technologies to build a basic online site for tracking shipments. I handled every invoice, call, and client request. It was grueling, but it was all mine. The odd thing about starting afresh is that people begin to perceive you differently. Old colleagues who had previously thought of me as Mr. Reliable began to regard me as an underdog. People enjoy an underdog narrative, especially when they have a common grudge. Within 8 weeks I had 4 clients. Not big contracts, but respectable ones. Companies that have been ignored during Brandon's leadership. One of them even gave me an email conversation in which Brandon attempted to utilize ChatGPT to create a shipping timetable and ended up with an entirely inaccurate freight route plan. I didn't laugh, but I did save a snapshot. However, it was not all victory. I made errors. One day I neglected to arrange a follow-up with a customer and almost lost the business. Another day, my Wi-Fi went out during a Zoom pitch, forcing me to deliver a presentation from a Starbucks parking lot in the rain. I learned the hard way that operating your own show required taking full responsibility for every triumph and setback, but that was the distinction today. I owned it. I wasn't a stand-in for a golden youngster with an Instagram addiction. I was the person in the arena. Then came the day when I saw Brandon in public for the first time since my departure. I was walking out of a supply store, buying up ink cartridges for my printer, when I noticed him across the parking lot getting into his new Audi. He did not see me. Or perhaps he did but didn't care. But something about the way he adjusted his fancy sunglasses before starting the engine irritated me. He still believed he had won. I could have walked away, but I did not. Instead, I went back in my car, took out my notepad, and began jotting out a list. Not of people, but of systems, flaws, vendors that my father's firm had mistreated, clients who had fled, and drivers who had been burnt. I wasn't about to sabotage them. That was not the idea. The aim was to outwork and outlast them. Because while Brandon was busy refining his LinkedIn page and flaunting it at business expos, I was in the trenches. I was reconstructing from the ground up. And every contract I signed, every email I wrote, and every mile driven by one of my partner drivers moved me closer to what? To a day I hadn't allowed myself to envision yet. Brandon would eventually discover that respect cannot be inherited. That allegiance isn't automatic. That you can't simulate leadership with cupcake parties and job titles you didn't earn. And that attempting to replace someone who constructed the system without knowing how it works would inevitably fail. By month 3, Forge Logistics was not only surviving, but also flourishing. I had 8 regular clients, 2 part-time virtual assistants, and a close-knit group of freelance drivers who enjoyed working with me. We were not flamboyant, we didn't have neon signs or company-branded pens, but we were quick, reliable and honest. No AI-generated scheduling, no tone-deaf memes, and no stupid executives attending synergy meetings as trucks sat idle. I had systems. I had discipline. Most importantly, I had trust. And that's when I started to think big. It's not just about scale, it's about retribution. I had not prepared for it. Not at first. I actually hadn't. For the first 2 months after my departure, I was too preoccupied with getting Forge off the ground. I was in survival mode, trying to prove to myself that walking away wasn't crazy. But success has an unusual way of clarifying your view. And as the clamor subsided, all I could see were the fissures emerging in the empire I once served. It began with murmurs, faint gossip from my former co-workers who still checked in from time to time. Brandon was cutting shortcuts and outsourced too much. He recruited a social media manager before updating the old shipping tracking system. One of the drivers told me that he had to pay for a gasoline reimbursement since Brandon's team did not have the proper documentation, but the actual opportunity arrived 3 weeks later. I was having lunch with Sophia, an accounting legend, as sharp as a scalpel and one of the few individuals from the previous business I still trusted. We had kept in touch. She hadn't chosen sides when I left, but she hadn't been afraid to summon Brandon, a puppy attempting to manage a farm. We met at a little ramen restaurant halfway between her office and my apartment. She appeared fatigued and anxious in a manner I hadn't seen before. "Things are bad," she explained, hardly allowing me to sit down. "And I mean bad. Bad." I raised my eyebrow. "Worse than the Shannon Freight Line catastrophe." She did not laugh. That concerned me. They lost 2 significant contracts last week, One of them was Birchwood Construction. Brandon promised them a fleet upgrade that he could not provide. And guess what? They pulled everything full exit. Birchwood, I said, shocked. That's 30% of Q2 revenue. Sophia estimated that if imported supplies are included, the figure approaches 40%. Do you know who Brandon blamed? I didn't respond. I already knew. Me, she stated plainly. I stated that I overestimated the financial allotment for equipment refreshment. Never mind that I had warned him 3 times in writing. He emailed the emails to Dad, but erased the cautions. I gazed at her. He edited your emails. She nodded. And your father believed him. He at least pretended to. That's when something clicked. They were not just in over their heads, they were desperate. That night I sat at my desk for many hours, phone face down, gazing at a spreadsheet. Not a financial one. A list of individuals, trends, and pressure spots. It was time to cease surviving. It was time to strike, but not foolishly or passionately. If I was going to take down the empire that had thrown me aside, I needed to be smart and surgical. So, I began laying the groundwork. The first stage is information. I already have a reliable network. Former clients, former co-workers and even vendors were tired of dealing with Brandon's influencer energy, as one supplier put it. But I needed more than complaints. I needed leverage. So I reached out to Marco. Marco has been the company's chief systems administrator for more than a decade. The quiet guy usually wore the same gray hoodie. He was also severely underpaid and almost invisible to the new leadership. I had always treated him with respect, served him coffee during server downtime. I sat with him through the long nighttime security upgrades. We were not close, yet there was trust. I met him at a dimly lit pub on a Thursday night. The type of establishment where the music is too quiet and the beverages are too powerful. I heard you're doing your own thing now, he remarked, drinking a neat whiskey. I am, I said. And I heard you're dealing with Brandon's tech meltdowns. Marco smirked. The individual believed HTML was a form of cloud storage. We laughed. Then I leaned in. I need help, I said. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, but if you happen to know about any vulnerabilities in the system or backups of deleted documents or, I don't know, internal audit logs from the last quarter, he poked his head out. Hypothetically, exactly, I said. Hypothetically, he did not say yes. But 3 days later, I received a secure zip file in my mailbox named lunch_me_notes inside. Gold exported email chains, transaction locks, client communication, mistakes hushed up, promises made but never kept, and even a voice recording. Brandon yelling at someone over the phone, calling a client a boomer with trucker brain because they dared to challenge his modernism. I haven't done anything with it yet. That was not the point. The goal was control. The next phase, clients. I began having quiet coffees, dinners and parking lot conversations. No pressure, no pitches. Please let me know if you ever need something different. Some were curious. A few people were already familiar with Forge. But what I needed was a tipping point, which came from an unexpected source. A lady called Natalie Haynes. Natalie was the procurement manager for a medium-sized agricultural supply chain where I had previously worked. She was outspoken, aggressive and resistant to corporate crap. We had a disagreement once over a late shipment, but we settled it properly, which she respected. She phoned me out of the blue. I heard you weren't dead, she said. Not yet, I said. Trying to stay that way. I have an issue, she added. Your brother promised me a 3-day turnaround for animal feed supplies. I took 6. Then he had the audacity to propose that we adjust our expectations since he was altering the paradigm. What exactly does that mean? It implies he's drowning, I explained. And he's pretending it's performance art. She laughed. Then without hesitation, email me your pricing. If you can promise delivery in 5 days or less, you've got our business. That was the crack that I needed. I put everything I had into delivering for her, nailing every delivery, sending regular check-ins and personalized updates. Natalie was impressed and had pals. Within 3 weeks, 3 of her industry connections called out. All of them told similar stories. Everyone was eager for something better. Word began to circulate. Brandon did not notice at first. He was too busy posting encouraging quotations on LinkedIn about rising from the ashes and organizing corporate ping-pong games. But Dad noticed. I know this because he called me out of nowhere. Jack, he said, speaking carefully. I hear you are working with several of our clients. They're not your clientele, I explained quietly. They are clients. They go where the service is. There was a pause. You understand this is not a game. You're burning bridges. No, I responded. You did it when you selected a slogan on a sweatshirt above the person who constructed your foundation. He exhaled. I never intended it to be this way. Then you should not have lighted the match. I hung up, then accelerated. I put up a new client portal, recruited another assistant, paid my drivers above market rates, and treated them as partners rather than cogs. The final part of my setup is visibility. I contacted a local business podcast that I was familiar with. They owed me a favor for a guest speaker appearance I made 2 years ago. I presented them a narrative about a son who left his family company to start his own. They loved it. We taped the episode in a single take. I didn't mention any names. I did not disparage anyone. I just told the truth. Loyalty is not always reciprocal. How leadership is earned rather than given. How vision is meaningless without implementation. The program aired the next week. By the following Monday, my inbox had received 70 fresh queries. Brandon's firm experienced its worst quarter in 6 years. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because all of this, all of the expansion, planning and leverage, was only the beginning. The big move was about to happen. And this time, it wasn't for business. It was personal. It happened on a Tuesday, and it was not an accident I selected that day on purpose. It was midweek, calm, and came immediately before my father's company's quarterly review meeting. The exact type of meeting I used to run. Brandon once failed to arrange a meeting until 15 minutes before it began, which he blamed on an email filter issue. It had been 8 months since I walked out of that office with nothing but pride and a resounding quiet in my chest. 8 months of starting from zero, watching Brandon bumble his way through my former role, burning bridges quicker than he could build them. Dad stood behind him, arms folded like everything was okay. But suddenly something was extremely wrong. Forge Logistics had burst. We were no longer the scrappy underdogs, we were the genuine deal. 20 clients, a warehouse lease in the works, 2 modest delivery fleets under contract, a devoted team of dispatchers and planners, and a reputation we did not promote. We did not need to. Our work speaks for itself. Brandon's firm, which was owned by his father, was bleeding. They had lost about half of their long-term contracts. 2 important investors had backed out. Their driver retention was the lowest it had ever been, and their books were disorganized. Brandon couldn't fathom the convoluted web of overlapping vendor agreements, variable payment conditions, and sloppy invoicing. They were vulnerable, but I didn't want to kick them while they were down. Not in an apparent way. I preferred something more lyrical. So I asked my dad to lunch. He was astonished to hear from me. I did not anticipate this. He stated this when we sat down at the same Greek restaurant where we'd previously had dozens of meals and where he told me I'd had enough. I thought we should talk, I remarked nonchalantly, biting into my euro. You know, see how things are going, he said softly. Brandon has been adjusting. I did not react. I flashed him a tight-lipped smile. He looked up. I've heard about Forge. You are doing great. Better than well, I answered. We are growing. He shifted uneasily. I could see it in his eyes. The creeping awareness that I was not here to recollect. I was there to show him I wanted to provide something. When I mentioned a way out, he raised an eyebrow. A road out of what? Your mess, I replied bluntly. You lost more than $1.5 million in contracts this quarter. Your investors are nervous. Your employee churn is hurting you. Operational consistency. And Brandon is not a leader. He is a liability. His jaw tensed, but he did not interrupt. I am willing to buy out 2 of your largest remaining accounts. They have already approached me, by the way. They simply didn't want to jump without knowing how clean the split would be. I'll make it as painless and generous as possible. You can take the cash and rearrange what remains. Whether to rebrand or not. It doesn't matter to me. You're trying to gut us, he remarked quietly. No, I responded. I'm giving you a chance to save anything because if I wanted to gut you, I'd simply let Brandon continue. We sat silently for a moment. My father looked at me, actually looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed something in his expression that was not arrogance or contempt. I saw dread, but he was not prepared to accept defeat. Not yet. I'll talk to Brandon, he responded stiffly. We will take your offer into consideration, I said, nodding. Do that, but I already knew he wouldn't. So I prepared for the final push. It started with the leak. I forwarded the materials Marco had provided me, including the damning email chains, transaction logs, and audio recordings, to one of the remaining investors, but not anonymously. I signed my name and added a cover letter in which I gently expressed my worries about mismanagement, incompetence, and ethical red flags that jeopardized not just operational success, but also legal stability. The investor replied within hours. "Thank you for your transparency," he wrote. "We will perform an internal audit promptly." The following morning, 3 top staff members quit. Brandon shared a vague, optimistic LinkedIn status about reorganizing with purpose. The next week, 2 additional clients jumped ship and joined Forge. Then came the board meeting. I wasn't invited and I didn't need to be there. Sophia was. She texted me after it was over. "He's gone. They are eliminating Brandon from operations." The board voted 4-1. I looked at the message for a long time. Not because I was startled, but because of the one individual who continued to vote for Brandon. Dad went down with the ship, even though it was already taking on water. But Brandon didn't leave quietly. 3 days later, he arrived at my workplace. He stormed in like a comedy character, crimson in the face and virtually vibrating with rage. My crew halted mid-call, taken aback by the interruption. I stood quietly, motioned for him to enter the corridor, and then closed the glass door behind us. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think this is yours now?" When I looked at him, all I saw was a youngster drowning in a pool he had never been trained to swim in. "I don't have to think it," I said. "I constructed it. You attempted to play founder and were buried inside the first 8 months. That's not winning or losing, it's just reality. You sabotaged me." "No," I said quietly. "You sabotaged yourself. I just stopped saving you." He opened his mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in a stillness thick with defeat. Following then, the repercussions spread quickly. The audit results were made public within a month. Investors sued for deception. Customers requested reimbursements. Vendors cut ties. Dad attempted to restore control, but the damage was irrevocable. They sold everything they could, reduced the workforce to a skeleton crew, and the firm was closed within 3 months. There were no news releases or headlines, just stillness. Where a firm had existed, there is now a ghost. I did not dance on the grave, post cryptic social media remarks, or brag during interviews. That was not the point. The goal was clarity, freedom, and truth. One evening, I sat in my new workplace, which was actually a genuine office rather than a folding table. There was laughing outside my door, as my crew shared refreshments and stories. My whiteboard was full with ideas, expansion plans and client names that I had worked hard to get. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Dad. I did not know how to let go. "You were correct." I was simply not prepared to acknowledge it. I gazed at it for a time. Then I flipped the phone face down, relaxed back in my chair and grinned because I was no longer craving his approval. He has a legacy. Now I had mine, and I constructed it from scratch. That was the true win, and I've never looked back.